Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. This is a show where we're going to put our property experts to task answering your property related questions. And joining me today is Richard Murray, CEO of Eurolink, provider of VECO estate agency software. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you back. I think we're almost at the point of calling you our resident software
Becoming a regular, yeah.
Good. Okay, well, it's good to see you, Richard, anyway.
You too.
And Carly Jermyn, I think is it your second show now?
It is, yes.
Right, great to have you back, Carly. Carly is CEO and solicitor at Woodstock Legal Services, residential, landlord and tenant law specialist. So good to have you back.
Thank you.
Right, Carly, you're first. I understand that government is introducing new leasehold regulations. Maybe.
Yeah.
Can the experts please explain the meaning and consequences of no-fault evictions?
Yeah, so the rental reforms that you're talking about, I guess that's probably the biggest concern for people is the getting rid of the Section 21s. So at the moment, you can evict on the basis that the fixed term of a tenancy has come to an end. You don't need to give a reason. Your paperwork has to be in order, which is easier said than done. And you can proceed on the basis of what they call the no-fault eviction. So there's no grounds to this claim for possession.
Just the end of that agreement?
Just the end. It's nice and simple. Your paperwork's all in order. Fixed terms come to an end. You've got a right to gain your possession of your property back. They're talking about abolishing that. It's really interesting because actually, I've never served on a Section 21 where someone serves it just for the sake of serving it. There's always a reason. So the question is whether the reforms, whether the existing grounds or, the new tweaks and proposals to the changes to the existing grounds will adequately cater for the reasons that landlords have historically used a Section 21 notice. And they used it because it was perceived to be quicker, less risky, because you didn't have to have your day in court. And for a judge to decide, simply that you've done everything you're supposed to have done properly, you will get possession. But it's interesting, and I think it's one of the biggest concerns about the reforms. Mostly, I'm not particularly concerned about the actual grounds. It's the court's ability to deal with all of these hearings, and they're not really dealing with the hearings in front of them at the moment particularly well. So that's the big challenge. The last committee report did support landlords' concerns on that and recommended that actually they don't get rid of Section 21 until they sort the court system out. So interesting one.
Carly, I'm sorry to do this to you, but you're not old enough to know this. But going back to Margaret Thatcher days, she brought in assured short-hold tenancies so that landlords could be sure of getting their properties back after a fixed term. Yeah. So that it brought a lot more properties into the rental market to solve the housing crisis, because we had one then as we have one now. Yeah. But this seems to be an absolutely retrograde step. Yeah, because you're going back to saying you've got a tenant, you're stuck with it.
Yeah, and that's the concern for landlords, and that's why you are seeing.
Why on earth is the government bringing this in? What's the purpose?
The aim is to give more stability in the market, but and I can see some of the logic and some of the way they're going. But if they don't reform the housing courts, people won't have the faith that they'll be able to get their property back once they establish one of those grounds. So yeah, it is a concern, and that is why you're seeing lots of landlords exit the market.
Well, the courts that I sat in only deal with criminal matters, not commercial or housing matters. I mean, that's for the county court. But I do speak to the people involved in county court, and I mean, you can spend a year and a half waiting at the minute.
Yeah, and some courts are much worse than others. Very much depends where you are. It's a bit of a postcode lottery where you are in the country. And it's not just getting the possession order at the hearing. Most of the time, particularly if people are waiting to be rehoused by the local authority, they're staying put until a bailiff comes, which can take, several more months.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think the key question here is local authority. Yeah. At one time, if you made up your mind either through financial constraints, which there's no bad side to that, but through commercial financial constraints to have a rented property throughout your life for your family, nothing wrong with that. But historically, the council would provide that. And now the councils haven't got the money. They're being pushed into selling their properties, not being allowed to invest in rental properties again with that money. And so we're just going backwards here, aren't we? What do you think, Richard?
Well, there's lots of funds obviously working on build to let now. I mean, that's really the only hope, I think, for the private rental sector. Yeah. From our point of view as a software provider, I guess our job is to make sure that our letting agents have all the information ready to go to present to those judges who are in such high demand. So when you do get in front of them, that you've got all the information. We've talked about this in the past, Kylie, about making sure that everything is recorded accurately and professionally, that it's date, time, user stamped, so it can be relied on in court.
Yeah, it's really important.
I mean, I will just explain to our viewers that Section 21 notice is the notice that says that at the end of the tenancy, you know, I'm having the property back. And I mean, I can remember from years ago that it was almost an agency discipline to serve that Section 21 the day that you signed the lease.
They did, which was, you know, really bizarre, but it was their way of protecting themselves, that they knew, you know, as and when it came to, you know, the end of the fixed term, they could action it. And I think everyone needs to remember that the objective of landlord and tenant is to have a long and stable tenancy. That's the ideal for everybody. And yes, there are conflicts in how you achieve that. And it, you know, I quite agree with you. Systems and processes become incredibly important to be able to establish that ground. And there has been talk about a pre-action protocol coming in. So systems and software become even more important, because even before it gets to me, you know, or even before a notice is served, you know, what have you done to talk about the arrears of rent and the issues that are going on at the property? So it's a watch this space, really, but I'm confident Section 21 will go.
I have to say, I wish the government wouldn't interfere in the market. It's very rarely successful, very rarely. Okay, Richard, your question. I know we've sort of had this question before, but it's something that everybody keeps asking us. Can the panel advise on what key features I should look for when trying to choose a software package for my agency business? You should be glad of the question, because it means a lot of people are turning towards digitalizing their businesses.
So it's a good question. We've talked before about procurement of software, but we've not necessarily got into what features to look for in a software. So if we're talking about a multidiscipline letting agency, estate agency, maybe some property management, client accounting, I think probably the most important feature will be the CRM aspect, so the customer relationship management angle. How are we managing contacts within the system? How do we link them to other records within the system? I think that's quite an important feature. Marketing, so making sure that it can produce the marketing materials that you need, email campaigns, how you're interacting with the major property portals, your own website, of course. And again, you only want to put this data into a system once, into a platform once. Any other kind of marketing aspirations you have, again, consider that as part of the feature pack. Property management, again, how you're managing suppliers, maintenance requests, key management. Sounds like a minor thing, but it's the bane of estate agents' life. You know, keys and losing keys, and where are those keys at any point in time? I know it sounds like a very small feature, but it's actually a really important feature, because it becomes quite costly to be constantly changing locks and replacing keys.
I can remember standing down here years and years ago when I worked for a particular agency, and I was standing there twiddling the keys around like this, and I threw them straight in the Thames. And the agent that I'd had them from never forgave me, I don't think. Anyway. But Richard, one of the things you mentioned there was the emailing out and marketing. Mm-hmm. How does that fit with data protection? Would a software system that you buy cover you for sending emails out, or is that difficult?
You've dealt with your GDPR requirements at the very early stage of engagement, and the software has various pop-ups. In terms of marketing, we work with different companies as well. There's some really good email marketing products out there. So again, it might not be that you're just looking at the property software for the fundamentals. You might want to look at other periphery products that are going to help you as well. Okay, all right, well, thank you very much for that. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show, so join me again after the break, when we'll be asking Richard and Carly more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and I'm joined by Richard Murray and Carly Jermyn. Welcome back, both of you. Thank you. Right, Richard. I wish to upgrade my office systems with a new software package. Are there any that link international statistics that will keep me abreast of market trends and generally assist in forward planning for the business? Yeah, it's an area that as a sector we need to embrace more, we need to get better at. because there are so many big data sets around now that in the future, AI and machine learning will all take full advantage of. But right now, you're probably looking at, I would say, someone like Zoopla, for example, or Land Registry, or Net House Prices, because certainly with Zoopla, for example, they have an API, an application programming interface. Think of it as a handshake between two systems. So you could actually jump into their system as an agent and take out some contextual data about house prices, average house prices, what's been sold, when it was sold, putting basically the property deals on maps, mapping it out, providing graphs and statistics. Now that's great for a pitch, because what I always recommend is use your own data and obviously reference it against the market data, because that might help then an agent differentiate themselves from the next agent or the agent down the road, or whoever it might be that they're competing with. Because the kind of the lazier element, if you like, will just go with a higher valuation, whether it's to sell or to rent, get the listing on that basis, and then have to negotiate the price down, which happens a lot. But I would say the better agents can use that sort of national type statistic base or data set to say, look, this is what's happening in the market. This is our data. So within our software, for example, we have a comparables report. So if someone walks in and says, I have a 4-bedroom, semi-detached house in area Y on road B, we can then run a report against properties that we're either marketing or we have sold or let in that same area. So at least you're coming in with a solid set of results, if you like, that if positive, you could present to the potential vendor or landlord.
Well, I think that's invaluable for an agent, isn't it? I mean, agencies by nature often employ younger people, hoping they'll grow into the business and get more experience. And it's always very interesting how a vendor will treat the information given by that sort of younger negotiator or assessor. And if he can back it up with solid data, then it just makes life so much easier.
Well, it adds credibility, doesn't it? And bear in mind, some of those youngsters who you talk about many years ago are now the business, the industry leaders.
Yeah.
The Peter Rollinses and people like that who have gone all the way from sort of junior negotiator to the Foxtons, Marsh and Parsons, some of the best known brands in London. So yeah, it's important to back these people. That's what we always say about software. It's there to support the people in a people's business.
Quite right. And I think to some extent, that's where the online agencies have gone wrong. They've forgotten that it is a people's business.
Yeah, and sometimes the tech has let them down, because essentially they're tech businesses and the technology hasn't been good enough to overcome the fact that it is, as you say, a people business. We've recognised that, always have, always will, because as we've talked about on these programs before, the online market hasn't emerged, it hasn't disrupted, it hasn't got to where anyone thought it would. So again, it's important that we maintain those values, I guess.
Carly, just before I ask your question, if I get you to just comment on some points of that. We see from the stats that the time from, let's loosely call it reservation to exchange, have increased by a terrific amount. Yeah. I think from memory, the average now is 160 days, which is almost, well, it's over 6 months, isn't it? Or in terms of working time. Is there nothing that the legal industry can't do to speed these things up? Is there no kind of digitalisation that can help you?
Do you know, yes, it is the tech, definitely, and digitalisation I'm sure can help. It's things like when you're waiting for searches and things like that, and having that we rely heavily on a case management system because the demands placed on us as lawyers is high, and a great case management system means that you can do your job better. But I actually think, if I'm completely honest, it's the working conditions of those working in the property sector as lawyers, the amount of volume of cases they have to work on means it's very, very difficult. It's emails back and forth all the time, and we see it with our team, they can get a deal done very quickly if both lawyers are focused on it, and come together, speak on the phone, focus on getting that deal done. But if you're bouncing back and forth with emails, and I think sometimes as well, it's where we're so highly regulated, risk is incredibly high in property. So there's a lot of checklist tick boxing, asking questions that have no real commercial value in that particular transaction, which I do think slows things down quite considerably. But
I do wonder, I may have said to you before, perhaps Richard, I don't know. Personally, I'd like to see Land Registry handle all of these searches. So Environment Agency, polluted land, anything like that, contaminated land. I'd love it all to be at Land Registry. I'd like it to be funded by agents and solicitors subscribing to that. So it needn't be a sort of taxpayer cost. And it would be a one-stop shop for conveyancers. But also I was listening to some people on a debate the other day, and they were saying that actually, especially since COVID, I think it was like 40% of regulated law firms in this country haven't got a full-time conveyancer.
Gosh.
And with the demands now that lenders are putting on solicitors for extra information, those people stepping into doing that odd conveyance that they get are just not up to speed with it, and therefore get drowned in it. You know?
And it's incredibly risky to step in and do. I think it's risky to do anything that's not your niche and your specialism. So that's quite concerning. And I take your point about the Land Registry, but they're so far behind on doing the basics at the moment. That seems a long way off. It would need considerable investment.
Yeah, I mean, because that again, from your point of view, the Land Registry data is. I mean, it used to be 3 months behind. What is it now? I don't know.
No, there's always delays, but I think we're talking about things like unique property reference numbers, so the UPRN now. That's a step in the right direction. Having all the referential data falling off the back of that UPRN. Simple things like an EPC register. There's lots of stepping stones that we need to take before we get to where you're suggesting we should be, Stephen. But you're not wrong. And people are trying to do it. CoDute are trying to put it together because the tech doesn't talk to each other.
But until everybody does it, it ain't going to work, is it?
Yeah, but as Carly's saying, you're relying on people and checklists and emails and back and forth and good people making sure that workflow essentially is completed every time without mistake.
Yeah.
All right, here's a nice legal one for you then, Carly. I recently took on a new tenant, and as is normal, I took a 5-week deposit. I must admit I was 5 to 6 weeks late on sending the deposit to the appropriate deposit holders, which he is obviously legally obliged to do, is he not? Somehow my tenant found out about this and had his lawyer sent me a letter threatening to report me to the authorities, with which I'm told will possibly result in a mandatory high-level fine. Is there really no flexibility here, or do you think they're just trying to seek some kind of compensatory payment from me?
It is mandatory, so it's fairly black and white. If you haven't protected it, it's very easy for tenants to go and you can go and search. I think Shelter, for example, have a system you can put in and tenancy details and you can see whether it is protected. So it's very easy for tenants to go and check. And it is, a mandatory penalty compensation of 1 to 3 times the value of the deposit and the return of the deposit. So my advice would be to consider whether you've suffered any breaches of the tenancy and see if there's anything that can be offset, but I would certainly look to negotiate. Avoid court if you can, because it's just extra cost. To try and negotiate it down towards the 1 times rather than 3 times. All
right, so, and you mentioned the return at 1 times the deposit value and perhaps the return of the deposit. Yeah. So what happens if it is at the beginning, like this is, of the tenancy, and they're stuck on it? They want the deposit back and a fine of the 1 times. Yeah. Does that mean then you run the tenancy with no deposit? Yeah, because that's quite dangerous, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, and it's incredibly difficult. So unfortunately, there's no way you're going to get around with that. And it's about trying to negotiate a deal that's best.
And is 5 to 6 weeks an offence?
Yeah, it's 30 days that you've got to protect it. It used to be 14. 2 weeks goes in a flash, doesn't it? So they've extended to 30 days. But, unfortunately, we still see landlords miss that deadline. It's quite rare they're missing that deadline. I think what we see more commonly, actually, is where they might meet the deadline or they don't quite comply with that particular scheme's requirements. So what I'd say to anybody is, either get an agent to do it for you, or you should be making sure you're checking the requirements of the particular scheme. Really go through it with a fine-tooth comb and make sure you keep an accurate record that you've complied with the requirements of that scheme, you've served the prescribed information, you've sent them the terms and conditions as required, and make sure you've got good, strong evidence that that's all been received.
Ouch.
Yeah.
That's quite a shocker, isn't it? Well, so if an agent does that on your behalf, does he take responsibility for it?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. I think most of the time, if an agent does, we do see agents not necessarily always do it perfectly. They normally deal with the compensation on your behalf, but the landlord could still be liable. Comes a messy three-way claim.
Just use a good agent.
Yeah, and they're doing it day in, day out, and they have their systems and processes, set up to do it. When you're busy and you don't have those systems and processes, if you're trying to juggle that sort of thing, it's easy to slip your mind or not do quite perfectly.
A good agent will have a software that does this automatically as part of that pre-tenancy, initial monies process, and they talk to all the schemes. And it's dealt with.
I think we live in such litigious times that I just think anybody doing their own management these days is actually
I wouldn't do it.
I wouldn't recommend it.
No, I wouldn't do it. And I'm a lawyer. I've said this many times. I'm a lawyer specialising in this area of law, married to a plumber. But actually, we had our own property, just sold it because actually to manage it is incredibly difficult. Even though that's our specialism, it's the time, care, focus, and attention that's required, and the systems and processes that we're always talking about that you need. It's so highly regulated.
You got no leaks though?
Huh? No leaks. No, actually, it's the last property you'll ever go to. Everyone else is much higher on the list.
Okay, well, I'm going to say thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
That's Richard Murray and Carly Jermyn. Thank you so much for coming in. Great answers to the questions. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.